Good evening everyone. Welcome to the second session of k-Snippet. Today we are going to do the economy part of the k-Snippet, where we will cover the 1 year of current affairs and also not just the factual part of the current affairs but also the conceptual part of the current affairs. This is a revision session, so we will go a bit fast, but if you face any problem during the class, if you face like I'm going too fast, you can always comment in the comment section and I will speak accordingly. So today's session, first we are going to do Indian Economy a Review. Indian Economy a Review, it's a document released by the Ministry of Finance instead of the Economic Survey. This year Economic Survey was not released because in the election year Economic Survey is not released. Instead, an Indian Economy a Review, a different document was released, which is separate from the Economic Survey. Economic Survey will be released when the new government is elected after the election. So Indian Economy Review, this is basically, this is not the official economic survey. It has only 2 chapters, whereas in the economic survey there are around 11 to 12 chapters. So there are just 2 chapters. This is a small document and it is not the official survey. Now what is going to be our approach in this document is, we will just look at the key terms and the trends which are there, because UPSC is not going to ask any factual question from the this document, Indian Economy Review, because first of all it is not a very important document, and second, UPSC we have seen that we have analyzed the previous year questions and we have seen that about 80 to 81% of the questions in economy are conceptual in nature and not factual. So what we are going to do, we are going to look at different terms, different concepts and different trends. For example, UPSC might give a statement like, unemployment rate has been increasing consistently from past 5 years. And you have to identify whether this statement is true or false. So UPSC will give such statement. UPSC will never ask that unemployment rate is what percentage, 3.2, 3.3, 3.4. That is not the pattern of asking questions by the UPSC. So this is not an official document, and expected a growth rate of 7% for the financial year 24. What do you mean by financial year 24? Financial year 24 basically means 2023-24. So it starts in April 2023 and ends in March 2024. So this is what we mean by financial year 24. I am saying this because a lot of people get confused. What is the financial year 24? Whether it is 24-25 or 23-24. So it is 23-24, and this term, such terminology will be used again and again during this whole class. So that is why I have clarified it. Now the terms which are given in this document are, for example, challenges and trends in Indian economy. So what are the challenges and trends in Indian economy? Just a second, hold on. I need to ask the manager here how to delete this particular mark here. Just a second. Rijwan ji. Am I audible now? Okay, sorry for the inconvenience. This is a new format that I am teaching, that is why. So moving forward, so the terms, challenges and trends in Indian economy. What are the challenges and trends that are faced by Indian economy? So shift in global manufacturing. Now the shift in global manufacturing is a challenge for the Indian economy, as well as it is also an opportunity. So how is it a challenge and opportunity? So this document says that hyper-globalization era in manufacturing is over. Hyper-globalization era is over, and there is an emergence of onshoring and friendshoring, which is affecting transportation, logistics, manufacturing, everything, and the prices. So what do you mean by hyper-globalization? What do you mean by onshoring? And what do you mean by friendshoring? This is how we actually read any government document. We do not ratify or mug up any of the data that is given there. We just understand that whatever the government is trying to say, are we able to comprehend it? If we are able to comprehend it, then we are good to go. So moving forward, we will read about what is hyperglobalization. Hyperglobalization basically refers to extreme level of interconnectedness. It refers to extreme level of interconnectedness and integration among countries' economies on global scale. For example, raw material are supplied from Africa, which are then supplied to China. In China, the goods are manufactured, which are then supplied to Mexico, where the goods are assembled, which is then again supplied to consumed in Canada. So this is hyperglobalization. You see how the goods are moving from one continent to another continent, just to get the benefits of economic benefits of low cost of production, low cost of transportation, etc. So this is what hyperglobalization means. Hyperglobalization, extreme level of interconnectedness and integration among countries. Now you do not have to again ratify this particular definition, because you are not going to be asked in the UPSC Prelims what is the definition. What you are going to need is just understanding what do you mean by hyperglobalization when the production process or the value chain of a particular product is distributed across countries, across economies around the world. Now, if hyperglobalization ending, then what is starting? Onshoring and friendshoring. Onshoring basically means, it is also called as reshoring, and it means to bring the business operation or sourcing back to the home country. For example, America, if it is manufacturing Apple phone in China, and they say that Chinese are using their production capacity, affecting the geopolitics of USA, then they might onshore these products, and USA government might say to Apple that you cannot import from China. Any of the Apple mobile manufactured in China cannot be imported in a country because it is a security risk. So you have to onshore the production. Similarly, friendshoring. Friendshoring is basically to this is also called ally shoring, to transfer the manufacturing or the sourcing to a geopolitical ally. For example, if France is facing some problems with China, France will transfer the manufacturing or the sourcing of a particular goods or raw material to India, because India and France are good friends. So this is called friendshoring. So these were the three terms. Artificial intelligence is also a challenge for Indian economy, because it is affecting the service sector, and India is the rising star in the service sector, and the cost of cost competitiveness that India has because of low labor cost is affected by the emergence of the artificial intelligence. Similarly, trade-off between economic growth and energy transition is also a challenge for Indian economy. Now you do not have to ratify anything, you just understand what is being talked here. Now there is one more term which is given here, non-food credit growth. The statement says that non-food credit growth is at the double-digit rates. It is growing at about 13% per annum. So we should understand what is non-food credit growth. This is how you read the documents. Whenever you read it like this only. You first see what is the term that is being used, and you try to understand it, you Google it, what does it actually mean. The meaning of this term will come in the further slides. This term's non-food credit growth. This will be explained in detail in the pages following. Before that, there are certain trends according to periodic labor force survey, which is being discussed in this particular document. So we are going to look at those trends, because UPSC might give a statement on the unemployment rate or worker population ratio. Now there are two types of questions which can be asked by UPSC in the prelims based on periodic labor force survey. One is the definition of a particular statement. For example, unemployment rate. What do you mean by unemployment rate, or what do you mean by worker population ratio? So how to understand it? You have to look at the equation. If you look at the equation and you memorize the equation, then you can easily solve if there is any conceptual question based on unemployment rate, worker population ratio, labor force participation rate, or any of the data given here. Other is to look at the trends. So there are two types of questions which can be asked by UPSC. First is conceptual question upon unemployment rate. They will give four statements and ask which of them define the unemployment rate. Or there can be trend based question, whether it is increasing, whether it is decreasing, whether it is fluctuating from past 5 years, from past 10 years, from past 3 years. So this is how UPSC frames questions. So if we look at the trends, unemployment rate has been reducing consistently from past 5 years. We will look at the data also, how much it has reduced. But this is what you have to know, that unemployment rate has been reducing consistently from past 5 years. What is unemployment rate? unemployment rate is equals to number of people unemployed upon labor force. Now, to understand it in better terms, we are going to take an example. For example, there are 100 people in a country. There are 100 people in the country. Now, out of 100, 80 are above 15 years of age. Number of people above 15 years of age are 80 and less than 15 years of age are 20. Less than 15 years of age are 20. So, the people who are above 15 years of age, we will call them working age population. Whoever is above the 15 years of age, we will call them working age population. So, out of 80 people, out of 100 people, there are 80 people who are above 15 years and 20 people who are less than 15 years, basically children. Now, among the working age population, we will say 54 are currently employed, 6 are looking for employment, and 20 are not looking for employment. So 54, 6, 60 plus 20, 80. So these people, who are these people? 20 people who are above the age of 15 and not looking, for example, students in your 11th and 12th class, or college going students, or housemakers, housewives. So these are the people who are above the age of 15, but they are not looking for employment. Whereas these people are looking for employment, out of which 54 had got the employment and 6 have not got the employment. They are still looking for it. So these are the people who are unemployed. What is this? This is total population. This is above 15 years of age population. Out of 15 years of age population, this is labor force. People who are either working or looking for employment are part of labor force of a country. People who are either working or looking for employment are part of the labor force of a country. So labor force is equals to number of people employed plus number of people looking for work, obviously in the age group of above 15 years of age. Above 15 years of age, people who are either working or looking for employment are part of labor force. Now, what is labor force participation rate? Labor force participation rate is equals to labor force, that is 54 plus 6, divided by number of people above 15 years of age. How many people are there above 15 years of age? 80. So what is going to be the labor force participation rate here? Labor force participation rate is going to be 60 upon 80, because 60 includes both the number of people who are employed and the number of people who are looking for employment. 54 plus 6. So labor force is equals to 60 upon 80. 60 is the number of people who are either looking for employment, are employed, and 80 is the number of people above the age of 15. Now the next term is unemployment rate. What is unemployment rate? Unemployment rate is number of people unemployed divided by labor force. What is the labor force? Labor force is 60 people. So unemployment rate is 6 upon 60. Now, this is going to be a bit confusing if you are reading it for the first time, if you are knowing it, if you are, understanding it for the first time, but you note it down, you note down the equation and you make your own example and try to understand how the, these data are calculated. Once you have understood it, if there is any conceptual question on these terms, you will easily solve them. So, labor force participation rate is basically labor force divided by number of people above the age of 15. Now, unemployment rate is number of people unemployed divided by labor force, that is 60. So unemployment rate is 10%. So unemployment rate does not take into account all the population of a country. It does not even take into account all the working age population of a country. It only takes into account the labor force of a country. Labor force is number of people who are either working or looking for employment. And the third data is worker population ratio. Now what is worker population ratio? Worker population ratio is number of employed people divided by population above the 15 years of age. How many people are employed? 54 divided by 80. 80 is the working age population. Population above the 15 years of age. So we have the unemployment rate, labor force participation rate and worker population ratio. These three data are calculated in all the economic surveys and all the budgets which are released by the government of India. So you should have the conceptual understanding. If UPSC asks a question in prelims, that is not a surprise. You should know it. So this is the conceptual meaning of labor force participation rate, unemployment rate, and worker population ratio. Now, moving forward, we will look at the trends. Unemployment rate, different categories of unemployment rate is given here. You do not have to memorize any of the number that is given here. All you have to do is look at the trend, and the trend is same in all the data, whether unemployment rate is of urban people, rural people, or total population of urban and rural, whether they are talking about male, female, or total. In each of these three categories, in all of them, the unemployment rate has been reducing consistently from past 5 years, from 3.8 to 1.8, from 5.3 to 2.4, 7.7 to 5.4. So in all of them, the labor, the unemployment rate has been reducing consistently from past 5 years. So unemployment rate, if the UPSC gives a statement that unemployment rate of rural women has been reducing consistently from past 5 years, correct statement. If UPSC gives a statement, unemployment rate of urban male has been increasing, wrong, it has been reducing consistently from past 5 years. Now, if you ask about labor force participation rate, whether about female, male, or combined, the labor force participation rate has been increasing consistently from past 5 years. You do not have to memorize the numbers. Now, there are three data that we talked about: labor force participation rate, worker population ratio, and unemployment rate. Labor force participation rate has been increasing from past 5 years. Worker population ratio has also been increasing from past 5 years, whether you talk about rural, urban, or the combined. And total, the unemployment rate has been reducing, from past 5 years. That's all that you have to know about the trends of these particular data. Now, there was one more term which was used in this, this year's economic review, that is Barbell Strategy. Barbell Strategy basically was used first time in the, 2021 budget after the 1 year of COVID-19. The Barbell Strategy was used by the Ministry of Finance as the, response to the pandemic, that was COVID-19. So, agile response during financial year 21, a global pandemic, Barbell Strategy was used. So, what is Barbell Strategy? Barbell Strategy is basically, it is a mixture of risk-free and extremely risky investment strategy used by investment, bankers or investment funds. So, it is used basically in the financial markets, mix of extremely risky and extremely safe assets. But for the, the explanation given by the Ministry of Finance for the Barbell Strategy was, it is combination of safety nets to cushion blow of vulnerable section with real-time data. What is safety net? For example, if you remember, during the COVID-19, the government of India provided free food to 80 crore people. They said that 80 crore people will get 5 kg of ration every month free of cost from the government of India. So this was a safety net. For example, 500 rupees were transferred to the women, Pradhan Mantri Jan Dhan Yojana account holders. Every month for 3 months, this was provided. Or, cost-free cylinders, gas cylinders were provided to the people under the, Ujjwala mission. So these are all safety nets to cushion the blow to vulnerable section. The vulnerable section, faces more burden during the economic recession, and the government supports them. So they call this Barbell Strategy, and they also use the real-time data to change the policy as the new data came up, because that was a very unprecedented time, and as a result, the government used the real-time data as the economic situation, as the social situation, the health situation in different states and different cities changed, as the government also changed its policy. So this is basically a Barbell Strategy. You do not have to know more than this for this particular, you do not have to know more than this for the Barbell Strategy. Examples of digital infrastructure. Digital infrastructure has also been talked here in this statement. Digital infrastructure, helps in technology and inclusive growth. Digital infrastructure is basically everything that helps you connect digitally. Everything that helps you connect digitally. The screen is part of digital infrastructure. The internet that you are using, the mobile phone, the broadband, the towers, the everything, the camera, everything is part of digital infrastructure. For example, data centers, broadband, mobile telecommunication, communication, satellite, everything is part of digital infrastructure. User devices, for example, mobile phones, laptops, software system, all these are part of digital infrastructure. Now, this is not very relevant from the perspective of prelims, because there is no new term given here, neither any important trend. One of the data which was I thought should be highlighted is about 180 gigawatt of renewable energy has been generated in our country. So 180 gigawatt was the target which was given in 2017 for year 2022, but by the year 2024 the 180 gigawatt target has been achieved. Now, when we talk about the consumption demand, PFCE is private final consumption expenditure, increased in share of GDP to 60.8%. Now, there are different ways of calculating GDP. When we move further, we will read about what are the three ways of calculating GDP, and one of them is expenditure, there is production, then there is income method. We will read it in detail. What is private final consumption expenditure? Currently, you just note down the private final consumption expenditure is the largest part of GDP, that is 60.8%. Rest of the government expenditure or the investment or the net exports, all these combinedly have 40% share only, whereas private final consumption expenditure has 60% share in the Indian GDP. And there is no fixed trend in the private final consumption expenditure. It was increasing, then it decreased, then again it started increasing. So there is no consistent pattern. If UPSC gives a statement that private final consumption expenditure as a share of GDP has been increasing consistently from past 5 years, that is not a correct statement. Neither it has been reducing nor it has been increasing consistently from past 5 years. It increases and decreases. Now, if we also talk about private per capita real gross national income, per capita real gross national income increased from year to year, then it reduced for 1 year. Then again it started increasing, that is in the financial year 2021. That was the first year of COVID-19. So except this year, every year the per capita real GNI, the gross national income, has been increasing consistently. So if UPSC says it has been increasing consistently from 3 years, then that is a correct statement. If UPSC says it has been increasing consistently from past 5 years, then that is a wrong statement, because in financial year 21 it reduced. Now, there is one more term used here, non-food bank. We talked about it, in previous pages also. What is non-food bank credit and what is food credit? So, if UPSC gives this question, what is food credit or what is non-food credit? I'm sure 99% of the aspirants are going to, take the wrong answer in this particular question, because nobody has ever taught me this. I have also come to know this term this year only, what is food credit and what is non-food credit. And it is given in the economic review, the government's document. So food credit is basically loan given to Food Corporation India, FCI, or to support procurement of food grains, for example, state governments. So the food credit is basically loan given by banks. It can be given by private bank, it can be given by public bank. For example, SBI, HDFC, ICICI, any bank can give this loan, and it can be given to two types of parties. One is Food Corporation of India, which is a central government agency, Food Corporation of India, or to the state governments for the procurement of food, or to the state government for the procurement of food grains. So any loan given for the procurement of food grains, whether to the state government or the FCI, is part of food credit. Rest all the loans are part of non-food credit. Why is it calculated? Because this does not reflect the real increase in credit growth. This reflects the real increase in credit growth. This loan is backed by central government. Whether the loan is given by to the state government or the Food Corporation of India, this is guaranteed by the central government, and as a result, this loan is a risk-free loan. As a result, it does not reflect the real increase in the economic growth of our country or real increase in the loan of our country. Non-food credit growth includes all other loans, for example, even including agriculture sector. If a farmer takes a loan, that is part of non-food credit growth, not the food credit growth. If we use logic, we might include, agriculture sector loan in food credit, but that is not the case. Food credit only includes FCI and state government for the procurement of food grains. All other loans are part of non-food credit growth, and this reflect the real increase in credit growth in our country. So this differentiation was important. Now the trends here are not very important because this term itself is not very very well understood. So if UPSC asks a question, it is going to ask upon conceptual question upon food credit and not a trend based question. Trend based question are mostly asked on the concepts which are very well understood by the general public. But even if you want to look at it, the non-food credit growth has been increasing after the financial year 20. From past 3 years, it has been increasing. Before that, it was going up and down. Investment rate is also increasing from past 3 years. Before that, there was no consistent pattern. Now, the capital expenditure by public sector. Capital expenditure by public sector includes 3 things. First is the capital expenditure by central government. Second is the grant for capital asset creation. These grants are provided by the central government to the either to the states or to the the urban cooperative urban local bodies or the panchayats. So any grant provided by the center to the states or urban local bodies for the purpose of capital creation is part of grant for capital creation, and it is also part of capital expenditure by public sector, and it also includes the resources of public enterprises. For example, Coal India Limited or IOCL, if they use the resources for the purpose of capital creation, for example, they are opening a new factory or new plant, that will be part of the capital expenditure by public sector. So total capital expenditure by public sector last year, that is financial year 24, that ended in March 2024, was 18.6 lakh crore, and out of which 10 lakh crore were by the central government alone, 3.7 lakh crore were the grants for capital creation, capital asset creation by the central government, and 4.9 lakh crore were central public sector enterprises, not the state public sector enterprises, only the central public sector enterprises. So this is basically, this reflects the cumulative capital creation used by the resources of the government of India. Now you do not have to memorize the figures, but you should understand capital expenditure by public sector. What does this term denotes? Now one of the data here given in the report was highest MSP increase is for lentil, masool and rapeseed mustard. You do not have to know more than that. What is the amount, which crop has what amount, you do not have to know in detail. What you have to know, that highest MSP increase is in the lentil, that is masoor, or rapeseed mustard. This is not very important. After GST, the truck distance has increased and logistic cost as a percentage of GDP has reduced. Now these are important terms. The document also talks about the reduction in net NPAs and gross NPA. So you should know the difference between net NPA and gross NPA. First, what is NPA? NPA is a non-performing asset. What is a non-performing asset? Non-performing asset is basically an loan given by the bank which they expect that they are not going to recover. When does this actually happen? The technical definition that is given by Reserve Bank of India, when any due in the principal or interest amount is more than 90 days. If any principal or interest is due for more than 90 days, then we consider that particular asset. Any loan that the bank is giving is an asset of the bank, because bank earn money from the loan that the bank is giving. So that bank will categorize that particular loan, that particular asset as non-performing asset, that the bank does not expect that this is going to fructify in the future. Now there are two terms, gross NPA and net NPA. Gross NPA is total NPA divided by total loans given by the bank. So basically, if the bank has given 100 rupees loans, and out of those 100 rupees, 5 rupees loans have come in the category of NPA, because the borrowers have not paid the dues, the interest or the principal for more than 90 days, then we will say that those 5 rupees have become part of NPA. Now the gross NPA of that particular bank is 5 upon 100 equals to 5%. What is net NPA? Net NPA is total NPA minus provisions made upon total loans given by the bank. Now the 5 rupees that the bank has categorized as NPA, the 5 rupees loan that the bank has categorized as NPA, non-performing asset, out of this, out of this 5 rupees, the bank has to make certain provisions. As per the guidelines of the Reserve Bank of India, the bank has to make certain provisions. And for example, bank has said that we have made the provisions for 3 rupees. Now, the net NPA would be 2 upon 100. That is 2%. So, net NPA will always be lower than gross NPA because banks have to make provisions for the NPAs, and there are different categories of loans, and the banks have, for example, 40%, 25%, 15%, 100%. So different categories of loans require different level of provisions, and as a result, the net NPA may vary from bank to bank. The difference between gross NPA and net NPA may also vary. But what you as an aspirant should know, the technical difference between gross NPA and net NPA. Net NPA is basically when you reduce provisions from the gross NPA, that's all. You do not need to know more than that. Now there is one more term which is used is net interest margin. Net interest margin has increased. What is net interest margin? Net interest margin is basically interest charged on loans minus interest given to depositors. Whenever a bank do business, bank will take deposit from the people and give some of the most of those deposit to the people as a loan. Now what is the profit that the bank generate? Bank will give interest rate of, for example, 5% to the people who are depositing money in the bank, and bank will charge 10% interest to the people who are taking loan from the bank. Now bank will take 10% and pay 5%, and the rest of the 5%, the difference between what bank is charging to the borrowers and what bank is paying to the depositors is called net interest margin. Net interest margin. Interest charged on loans minus interest given to depositors. That's it. It will, it should be enough to cover all the operating cost and profit of the bank, but you do not need to go in that. You just know this definition, just this equation. That is more than enough to solve any conceptual question on net interest margin. Next is return on equity. It's very simple. Profit upon total equity. Total share capital and equity are one and same thing. So profit upon total share capital is into 100, of course, is return on equity. Return on assets is profit upon total assets. How the total assets will reflect? Now, if you do not understand the balance sheet, if you are a student of commerce, then you know that total assets are equals to share capital plus borrowings. But if you are not a student of commerce, you just ratify it that assets equals to equity plus borrowings. Assets equals to equity, that is capital. Equity and capital are one and the same thing. Assets equals to capital plus borrowings or equity plus borrowings. So return on assets would be equals to profit upon total assets or profit upon total share capital plus borrowings. If you are not a student of commerce, you might find this a bit confusing, but just ratify it. You do not need to know more than this to solve any question in the prelims, because it is not a BCom exam, it is a UPSC exam. Now the net interest margin, what is better for the economy if the net interest margin is reducing or increasing? It is better if it is increasing, because it reflects that the banks are generating more profit and banks are more sound financially. So net interest margin has increased from 2.45 to 2.72. Return on assets should also be increasing. It has increased from 0.5 to 0.8. Return on equity has also increased from 8.48 to 12.35. So you should know what is net interest margin, what is return on assets, and what is return on equity. Now this data talks about, not a very important data. Now this paragraph talks about India's external debt. So India's external debt was placed total at 635 billion at the end of September 2023, and external debt as a ratio to GDP has reduced to 18.6%. External debt as a ratio to GDP has reduced to 18.6%. You do not have to remember exact what is this percent, but remember it is somewhere around 20%. That's more than enough. If UPSC gives any factual question, they are going to give any absurd statement upon this only. They will say that external debt is 90% of India's GDP. No, external debt is just 20%, 18% of India's GDP. And short-term debt of total external debt is just 20%. So For example, India's GDP is 100 rupees. So external debt is just 18 rupees. If India's GDP is 100 rupees, then external debt is just 18 rupees. And out of 18 rupees, only 20% is, of short-term nature. Rest of the 80%, that is, we are talking about this 18%. Out of this, 20% and 80%. 20% is part of short-term debt and 80% is part of long-term debt. Which is better? Long-term debt is better because the government does not have to repay it in a short period of time, and it is not going to bring, it is not going to bring any balance of payment crisis. So the short-term debt, the lower it is, the better it is. So it has reduced to 20%. So out of total external debt, only 20% is short-term in nature. And apart from that, there is no other important data given here. So in this chart, they have talked about total external debt to GDP ratio. Just a second, hold on. Sorry for the disturbance. Just a second, hold on. Uh, okay, so we are back. There were just some technical glitches. I'm not very well versed with these smart boards. So in this particular data, there is external debt position. What is external debt? External debt to GDP, short-term debt to external debt of total external debt. We have talked about it. Now moving forward, foreign exchange reserves. Now UPSC has already asked this question: what is import cover? What do you mean by import cover, and what is the unit of import cover? Import cover is basically how many months of import can be made by the foreign exchange reserves of a particular country. For example, India imports $500 billion of, $600 billion worth of goods every year, goods or services every year. India has an import expenditure of around $600 billion. And if India has $550 billion of foreign exchange reserves, then we will say that India has an import cover of 11 months. Because every month we are spending about $50 billion, and in 11 months we will spend $550 billion. So this is basically import cover. Currently, import cover is more than 10 months in country. India's foreign exchange reserves are $623 billion, and import cover is more than 10 months currently. So this is it about the economic review document. Now we are going to do the interim budget. Interim budget, we are going to do, in the previous classes we have talked about these things in detail. Now I am going to move through these things very fastly. First of all, the budget is prepared by Department of Economic Affairs. This question has also been asked by the UPSC in one of the prelims question. So you should know Department of Economic Affairs of the Ministry of Finance prepares the budget. Now in budget there are two sides, receipts and expenditure. There are receipts of two types, revenue and capital receipts. Revenue receipts are basically the recurring receipts, and capital receipts are the one which are non-recurring. So receipts are of two types, receipts and revenue receipts and capital receipts. Revenue receipts are the one which are recurring in nature. For example, if you bring money monthly, for example, if you rent your property or you earn money by salary, then we will call it revenue receipts. And if you sell your property, then we will call it capital receipts, because it affects the assets and capital of your assets and liabilities of your financial balance sheet. So the revenue receipts are recurring in nature. For example, taxes that the government receives are part of revenue receipts, because government does not have to give anything to get the taxes. And also non-tax revenue receipts are also there. For example, interest, if that the government is provided any loan to the people, and for example to the state governments or the urban local bodies, and the government is getting interest on those loans, then we call it non-tax revenue receipts. Similarly, the capital receipts is of non-recurring nature. What do you mean by non-recurring? Non-recurring is basically which you can take only once, and that is not going to provide you any other benefit in the future. Dividend that the profit or the dividend or profit that the government receives from the public sector enterprises is part of non-tax revenue receipts. But if the government sells the shares of Coal India Limited, for example, Coal India Limited every year was transferring 50 crore rupees to the government of India. So that was part of profit that the Coal India Limited was generating. Now this is a hypothetical example. If the Coal India Limited was generating 50 crore profit and the Coal India Limited was transferring 50 crore to the government of India, what does government of India has to give back? Nothing, because it's its own ownership out of which it is generating profit. But if the government of India sells the share of Coal India Limited, then we will call it capital receipts. Now, because the government has sold its shares and it has affected the assets and liabilities of the government, and it is non-recurring in nature. Once the shares are sold, those shares are not going to generate any profit or any return in the future. So capital receipts are non-recurring in nature. One is debt creating, other is non-debt creating. Debt is basically when the government takes loans, then we will call it debt creating capital receipts. Non-debt creating capital receipts is basically disinvestment made by government. For example, sale of shares of the Coal India Limited. Expenditure are also of two types, revenue and capital expenditure. Revenue expenditure which does not create any asset, capital expenditure which creates any assets. For example, salary or pension provided to the government employees is part of revenue expenditure, whereas the infrastructure expenses or loans provided to the states is part of capital expenditure, because that is going to generate return in the future. So whatever does not create asset is part of revenue expenditure, whatever create asset is part of capital expenditure. Now if we look at where does the rupee comes from in the budgeted receipts of 23-24 and 24-25, we see that borrowings and other liabilities was the largest part and is still the largest part of all the receipts that the government receives. 28% of all the receipts are borrowings. Government loan लेके ही 28% अपना budget finance करती है. After that, the second biggest part is income tax. The second biggest part is income tax. Last year it was GST. Income tax was less than GST last year, but this year income tax is more than GST. So income tax has become the biggest source of tax revenue. or second biggest source after the borrowings and other liabilities for the government of India. So after every chart, I have given what are the inferences that we can make from this particular chart. So borrowings remain the largest source of government receipts. Borrowings are still the largest source of government receipts, and income tax has become the largest source of tax revenue, overtaking GST. Earlier, from past 4-5 years, since when the GST was introduced, GST was the largest source of tax revenue, but now the income tax has become the largest source of tax revenue, overtaking the GST. So currently borrowings are more than income tax, more than GST, more than corporation tax. You do not have to memorize this ranking, but you should know income tax is more than GST. This has happened for the first time in 5-6 years. So there might be a question on this particular, there might be a question on this particular fact. Now, where does the rupee go? That is the expenditure side of the government. The biggest expenditure is interest payment. Interest payment was 20% last year. This year also is the interest payment. And second biggest expenditure is state share of taxes and duties. That is also 20%. Last year also it was around 20%. This year, last year it was 18%. This year it is 20%. So second biggest is state share of taxes and duties. Other than that, you do not have to need to know anything else. Now allocation to different ministries. All you have to know that Ministry of Defense has the highest allocation. Any other thing you do not need to know. Receipts and expenditure. Revenue receipts have been increasing consistently from past 3 years. Capital receipts have been reducing consistently from past 3 years. Now this is a good thing, because revenue receipts reflect the profit that is generated from the government of India. That is a recurring in nature. Government of India is not selling any of its assets to generate revenue receipts. Whereas to generate capital receipts, government either has to take loans or sell off its own assets. So capital receipts is not a good thing. So revenue receipts are increasing, capital receipts are decreasing. So this is a good thing. Next is revenue expenditure and capital expenditure. Both are increasing from past 3 years, revenue expenditure as well as capital expenditure. Capital expenditure, this year it was announced that capital expenditure has been increased by the central government from 10 lakh crore to 11,11,111 crore. So this was announced by Ministry of Finance and it became a big heading in the newspaper. So you should know this figure, that capital expenditure has increased from 10 lakh crore to 11,11,111 crore in the financial year 25. Now in the budget, there are 4 types of deficits which are calculated by Government of India, and you should have the conceptual understanding as well as the data trends of all these 4 types of deficit. First is fiscal deficit. Fiscal deficit is nothing, just total expenditure minus total earnings. Total expenditure minus total earnings is fiscal deficit, and fiscal deficit is also equals to borrowings. Fiscal deficit is also equals to borrowings. So fiscal deficit is equals to total earnings. So total expenditure minus total earnings except the loan, and it is also equals to borrowings. So deficit is financed by borrowings. That is why it is equals to borrowings. Next is revenue deficit. Revenue deficit is basically revenue expenditure minus revenue receipts. Revenue expenditure minus revenue receipts. Other than that, you do not need to know anything. Next is primary deficit. Now people get confused in primary deficit and effective revenue deficit. Effective revenue deficit is basically when the government calculates revenue deficit, it includes revenue expenditure minus revenue receipts. Now in the revenue expenditure, there is an expenditure which is grants to state for the purpose of capital creation. Grants that are provided by the government for the purpose of capital creation, and that is part of revenue expenditure. And if the central government, for example, central government, there are 2 ways, for example, the government of India wants to build a bullet train in Maharashtra. Now there are 2 ways. The government of India directly invests its money in developing the bullet train, or the government of India can give grants to the government of Maharashtra and say that you build the bullet train. Now in the first case, when the government of India directly building the bullet train in Maharashtra, we will say that this is a capital expenditure. But in the second case, when the government of India gives grants to the government of Maharashtra for the purpose of building the bullet train, then we will call it for the government of India, that is revenue expenditure. Why is it a revenue expenditure? Because the government of India is not going to get that money back. Whenever the capital expenditure is made, government of India will receive some returns from it. But revenue expenditure is basically, grants are part of revenue expenditure. So the grants that are given by central government to states or urban local bodies for the purpose of capital creation was forming part of revenue expenditure, and as a result the revenue deficit was increasing, which reflects badly on the budget of the government of India. So the government of India started calculating effective revenue deficit. What is effective revenue deficit? Effective revenue deficit is equals to revenue deficit minus grants to states for capital creation. So the grants to state which are provided for capital creation are removed from revenue deficit to identify what is the effective revenue deficit, what is the actual revenue deficit, and it does not include any expenditure which is given for the purpose of capital creation. So it is equals to revenue deficit minus grants to state for capital creation. Primary deficit is equals to fiscal deficit minus interest payment. Primary deficit includes fiscal deficit. Out of fiscal deficit, how much amount is paid just for the purpose of interest payment. So primary deficit is equals to fiscal deficit minus interest payment. Fiscal deficit has been reducing consistently from financial year 2021. It was 9.2%. Before that, it was lower than this. So after that, 6.7, 6.4, 5.8, 5.1. You do not have to memorize the figures here, data here. You just have to know that it has been reducing consistently from past 4 years. Current account deficit, there is no particular trend. Now, you cannot memorize all these things in just one go. You have to look at these graphs multiple times so that you know what is the trend. Current account deficit does not have any trend. Unemployment rate, we have already seen it is reducing consistently. And gross NPA are reducing consistently from financial year 18. So from past 5 years, the gross NPAs have been reducing. Before that, they were increasing. So after the financial year 18, the gross NPA have been reducing. India and world GDP, dollar terms. So India and world dollar GDP growth, people will assume that Indian GDP growth is higher than the world GDP growth even in dollar terms. But that is not the case, because many a times the world dollar GDP growth was higher than Indian dollar GDP growth. For example, financial year 19 and financial year 21. Currently, Indian dollar GDP growth is higher, but it has not been the case. So if UPSC gives a statement that from past 10 years, Indian dollar GDP growth has been higher than the world dollar GDP growth, that is not correct. Now in this, there is one thing that you have to know, which is multidimensional poverty. What is multidimensional poverty? Multidimensional poverty is basically index calculated by UNDP and OPHI. UNDP is United Nations Development Program, and Oxford Poverty and Health Index. So UNDP and Oxford together jointly calculate the multidimensional poverty index, and there are 3 dimensions in multidimensional poverty. One is health, other is education, and third is living standard. And all these 3 have 33% weightage. All these 3 have 33% weightage, or 1/3. Now in health, these 2 will have equal weightage. Out of 1/3, nutrition will have 1/6, child mortality will have 1/6. Years of schooling, out of education there are 2, so this is 1/6, this is also 1/6. But in living standard there are 6. In living standard there are 6 indicators, and each indicator will have a weightage of 1/18. So all the indicators, each indicator will have a weightage of 1/18. So all the indicators do not have equal weightage in the multidimensional poverty index, whereas all the dimensions have equal weightage. All the dimensions have equal weightage, but all the indicators do not have equal weightage, because these 4 indicators have 1/6 and these 6 indicators have 1/18. You have to look at these indicators, and if UPSC might give a question in prelims that which of the following indicators is not part of multidimensional poverty index. So you should have fair understanding of this. Now next important data in this budget is Lakshpati Didi scheme. Lakshpati Didi scheme is basically a scheme by Government of India. It is initiated by DAY NRLM, National Rural Livelihood Mission, of the Ministry of Rural Development. So DAY NRLM has initiated this scheme to encourage women to start micro enterprises in rural areas. And earlier the target was 2 crore women. So 2 crore women would be made capable. They will be given training and they will be given policy support, and they will enable them to earn 1 lakh rupees per year. But the target recently in this budget has been increased to 3 crore women. Next is other major initiative. Interest-free 50-year capital expenditure loan is provided by the central government to the state, 1.3 lakh crore, and 300 units of free electricity to 1 crore households would be provided through rooftop solarization. Now, this is not very important data. This you should know, Anganwadi and Asha workers have recently been included in the Pradhan Mantri Jan Arogya Yojana. Ayushman Bharat Pradhan Mantri Jan Arogya Yojana. Earlier, Asha workers and Anganwadi workers were not part of the beneficiaries. Now they have become part of the beneficiaries. UWIN platform is basically, it is on the lines of COVID platform. We have seen COVID platform. We have used it, to book our appointment for vaccination. Similarly, UWIN platform has also been created, and it will register and track vaccination of pregnant women and newborn. So pregnant women and newborn, when whatever the vaccination they need, sorry, the UWIN platform will provide all the details, and it will also provide them where the vaccination is happening, and they will also track how much vaccination has been given to the newborn or the pregnant women. So this will basically help in streamlining the data. Now, this is budget at a glance. Now, whenever you look at the budget at a glance, you do not have to look at any of these data. What you have to look at these terms, whether you understand these terms or not. If you understand them, you do not have to read them. So revenue receipts, we know what is revenue receipts. We know what is capital receipts. Total receipts is, summation of both of them. Then we have total expenditure. Out of total expenditure, there is revenue, there is interest payment, grants in aid of creation of capital. Then there is capital account also. Then there is effective capital expenditure. Now, a lot of aspirants might not know what is effective capital expenditure. Effective capital expenditure is basically capital expenditure by the central government plus grants provided by the central government for the purpose of asset creation. So the grant provided by the central government for the purpose of asset creation affects two data. One is effective capital expenditure, other is effective revenue deficit. Effective revenue deficit is equals to revenue deficit minus grants provided for the purpose of asset creation, and effective capital expenditure is equals to capital expenditure plus grants provided for the purpose of capital creation. Apart from that, fiscal deficit, revenue deficit, primary deficit, we have seen all of them. Effective capital expenditure, we have already talked about it. Deficit trends, after financial year 21, all the deficits are reducing. After financial year 21, whether fiscal deficit, revenue deficit, effective revenue deficit or primary deficit, all of them are reducing consistently. So that is you have to know. Now, sources of deficit financing, the largest source is of course the market borrowings. Market borrowings are government securities. The long-term bonds which are issued by the government of India are called government securities, which have maturity for more than 1 year. Then after the market borrowings, the second biggest source is securities against small savings. Now, what is securities against small savings? Securities against small savings is basically include small saving accounts like postal deposit, small saving certificate, pension scheme. For example, whenever we give money in any pension fund, I subscribe to a national pension scheme or any pension fund, and where does that money go? That money will go to the government of India. And what is it for the government of India? Government of India says that you subscribe to this pension fund or you subscribe to this postal account fund, and you pay every month 4,000 rupees, 5,000 rupees in this particular amount. And once you have the reach of once you reach the age of 60, we will provide you pension. So we give that money to the government of India. Government has to repay that money someday to us. So what is it for the government of India? It is a loan. The money that we are the money that we are deposit in the I'm sorry. I'm not feeling very well today, so bear with me. So money that we are depositing in any small saving certificate, for example, Sukanya Samriddhi Yojana, we deposit amount and we expect that the government will repay us at some day. In postal deposit, we deposit amount and we expect that the government will repay us someday. In pension scheme, we deposit amount till we reach the age of 60 years, and after that we get that money back. So every money that we are depositing, that we expect that the government will repay us at some day, some date, that is a loan for the government of India, that is a borrowing for the government of India. So securities against small saving is the second biggest source of borrowings for the government of India after government securities. Next is then short-term borrowings, that is T-bills. We already know what is T-bills. That is the securities issued for less than 1 year of maturity period. Now trends in tax receipts. There are two things that you have to know. Tax as a percentage of GDP does not have any fixed trend. You know, it was earlier increasing, then it reduced, then again it started increasing. So there is no consistent pattern in the tax as a percentage of GDP. Second thing that you have to know, the share of direct and indirect taxes. Now currently direct tax is more than indirect tax, which has been the case that the direct tax was more than indirect tax except the financial year 21. Except the financial year 21, the direct tax was more than indirect tax. Even before that also, the direct tax was more than indirect tax. After that also, the direct tax was more than indirect tax, except the financial year 21. So UPSC might give a statement that indirect tax is more than direct tax receipts. That is not a correct statement. Second thing, UPSC might give a statement from past 10 years, direct tax has been more than indirect tax. That is also not a correct statement. From past 5 years, since the financial year 22, direct tax is more than indirect tax. That is a correct statement. Now we have seen that borrowings, we saw that the borrowings is the largest source of receipts for the government of India, but that is when we bifurcate tax receipts in different taxes. For example, income tax, corporate tax, GST, duties, excise duty. If we bifurcate all the tax receipts in different taxes, then the borrowings is the largest part. But if we accumulate, if we combine all the tax receipts of the government of India, then tax revenue is more than the borrowings. Tax revenue is more than the borrowings. So the largest source of receipts for the government of India is tax revenue, after that borrowings, and if we bifurcate tax revenue, then borrowings is more than any of the particular tax revenue. So we have already talked about it. What is effective capital expenditure? This has been increasing consistently, and even the grants in aid for creation of capital assets, that is also increasing consistently. Capital expenditure is also increasing consistently. That's all you have to know. So we are done with the economic review and also the budget. Now we are going to do the other part of the current affairs, rest half part of the current affairs. So basic concepts of economy. RBI report on finances. So RBI published a report. RBI published a report, State Finances, a Study of Budget, in which it has talked about how the state finances or the state finances have fared in the financial year 24, and it has studied the budget of different state, and the RBI has said that gross fiscal deficit to GDP ratio of states has reduced. Fiscal deficit, gross fiscal deficit to GDP ratio has reduced, and also the debt to GDP ratio has also declined. There is increase in tax buoyancy. Tax buoyancy is basically change in tax with respect to change in GDP. Now we will, as we move forward, we will look in detail what is tax buoyancy. Fiscal deficit. There are two types of fiscal deficit: gross fiscal deficit and net fiscal deficit. So recently, the government of India reduced the fiscal deficit to 5.1% in the financial year, this year's budget, and it was a very pleasant surprise for most of the economists. So you should know the difference between gross fiscal deficit and net fiscal deficit. Gross fiscal deficit is the total borrowings requirement of the government of India. So gross fiscal deficit is total expenditure minus total revenue. whereas net fiscal deficit is gross fiscal deficit minus net lending of the central government. So the government borrows certain money and government also lends certain money. Gross fiscal deficit only includes what the government is borrowing, but net fiscal deficit reduces the amount which the government is lending to the people. For example, मैं किसी से 100 रुपए उधार लेता हूं और किसी को 20 रुपए उधार दे देता हूं, तो ग्रॉस फिस्कल डेफिसिट कितना है? The 100 rupees that I have borrowed from the people, whereas the net fiscal deficit, that the net borrowings that I have made, is 100 minus 20, because 20 rupees I have borrowed and given to someone else. So 80 rupees is the net fiscal deficit. FRBM Act was also in news. You do not have to know much about it. What you have to know is NK Singh review committee on FRBM. Why is it in news? Because the government reduced the fiscal deficit to 5.1%, and also the report by RBI talks about the targets which are given by the NK Singh review committee. So NK Singh review committee gave certain targets which were incorporated in the FRBM Amendment Act 2018. What were these targets? The first target is debt to GDP ratio. So debt to GDP ratio of the country should be 60% by financial year 25. This is what the NK Singh review committee said. The debt to GDP ratio should be 60% by financial year 25, of which 40% belongs to the center and 20% to the states. Currently it is more than 80%. For states also it is about 31%. For center it is about 60%. So currently we are very far away from the targets, especially because of the COVID-19. But debt to GDP ratio that is given by this particular committee was 60%, 40% for the center, 20% for the state. Revenue deficit target was given of 0.8% by 2023, which has not been achieved. Fiscal deficit target was given of 2.5%. All these were included in the FRBM Amendment Act 2018. Fiscal deficit of 2.5%, revenue deficit of 0.8%, and debt to GDP ratio of 60%. Now, escape clause, UPSC has already asked a question upon escape clause. The question was about which of the following, laws talk about escape clause, and the answer was FRBM Act. But there can be a conceptual question on escape clause because UPSC has a tendency to, repeat the themes that it asks. So, escape clause, which is given in the section 4.2 of the FRBM Act, talks about that the center can exceed the annual fiscal deficit target. So the fiscal deficit target of 2.5%, there was an annual reduction of 0.3% every year, and those annual targets were given by the FRBM Act. So in the act there is an escape clause. Escape clause says that the center can exceed the annual fiscal deficit target, that 2.5, 2.8, 3.1, whatever the percentage that be, if citing certain grounds. What are the grounds? Grounds are national security or war, if the government of, India engages into war in any other country, national calamity, collapse of agriculture, structural reforms, for example GST, decline in real output growth of a quarter by at least 3%. So these are the criteria under which the center can exceed the escape clause. Off-budget borrowing. Off-budget borrowing is basically borrowings which does not reflect in the budget. For example, Government of India, instead of borrowing directly from the people, what it will do, it will ask Coal India Limited to take loan from the SBI. If the Coal India Limited takes loan from the SBI and Government of India becomes the guarantor in that particular loan, that loan is the liability of the Government of India, but that is not reflected in the budget. So off-budget borrowing, center has said that the off-budget borrowings which were earlier very high in thousands of rupees crore, which has been brought down to zero. And why off-budget borrowings was looked down upon, why was it criticized? Because it bypasses the FRBM condition. FRBM condition talks about debt to GDP ratio, fiscal deficit, but those do not form part of the off-budget borrowing, do not form part of the fiscal deficit figures, because that is not even reflected in the budget. For example, loans taken by the public sector enterprises, bonds issued by the special purpose vehicle. For example, smart cities have special purpose vehicle. So Ajmer smart city might issue a bond which is not reflected in the balance sheet of the Government of India. Use of public sector banks funds. Next is tax buoyancy. So the government has said that the tax buoyancy has shrank the deficit, that is fiscal deficit of 5.1% was possible because of the tax buoyancy. What is tax buoyancy? Tax buoyancy is percentage change in tax revenue with respect to percentage change in GDP. For example, last year the tax revenue increased by 17.8%, whereas GDP increased by 5.1%. These are nominal figures. Inflation has not been reduced from it. So the tax revenue increased by 17.8%, GDP increased by 15.1%. So we say the tax buoyancy of 1.18. Whenever the tax buoyancy is 1 or more than 1, that means the central's tax revenue will increase more than the increase in GDP. If tax buoyancy is less than 1%, that means the tax revenue will not increase as much the GDP is increasing. Merit goods and non-merit goods were also in news. What do you mean by merit goods? Merit goods are basically goods or services which are beneficial for individuals in society, and non-merit goods which have adverse effect on individual and society. What are the example? Merit goods के example है education, health are part of merit goods, whereas tobacco and alcohol are part of non-merit goods. So consumption and tobacco and alcohol is disincentivized by the government of India. So what is the government's approach for the merit good and non-merit good? For merit good, government will provide cost-free. Government will provide cost-free these goods. For example, education or health is provided by the government of India cost-free, or government might subsidize the consumption of these goods. There is non-merit goods. Non-merit goods, the government will increase taxes and duties. For example, every year we hear that the government has increased the taxes and duties on tobacco or on alcohol. So the government tries to reduce consumption of people by regulating the production or increasing the taxes. OPS versus NPS, old pension scheme versus national pension scheme. Old pension scheme versus national pension scheme was in news because recently last year's elections, after when the state election was there, a lot of state governments implemented OPS scheme in their state. So this was in news, and you should know the difference between OPS and NPS. OPS is provided only for the government employees, whereas NPS can be subscribed by anyone, whether government or the private employee. What is the difference? OPS is basically pension provided by the government 50% of your last drawn salary. For example, I am a government employee and I draw 60,000 rupees every month when I am turning, when I retire at the age of 60 years. So the government will provide me 30,000 rupees after my retirement. Every month, government will provide me 50% of my salary after the retirement. That is old pension scheme. Now to get that salary, to get that pension, I do not have to contribute in any way. I was just I was just a government employee, and when I retire, government will provide me 50% of my salary. Now in national pension scheme, I will not get any money if I have not contributed any money. For example, to get benefits under the national pension scheme, every month I have to contribute certain amount of money in the national pension fund. Now the pension that I will receive after the age of retirement will depend upon how much I have contributed and how much this money has grown. Now there is no fixed amount of money that I will get under this pension. So that is why the government employees were favoring the old pension scheme, and it was used as a soap by the political parties to attract the voters. So it is 50%, whereas the pension amount can vary. This can be availed by everyone. This can be availed only by government employees, and the government funds this entire scheme, because the burden of this particular scheme, old pension scheme, falls on the government only, whereas national pension scheme, the employees and employers contribute every month from their own earnings to the national pension scheme. So government is not contributing anything in it. Tax benefits, every month there are no tax benefits for the national pension scheme, and the pension amount that the government employee receives is also tax free. The pension amount that the government employee receives is also tax free. So every month I am not getting any tax benefit because I am not contributing anything. Whereas under national pension scheme, if I am earning, for example, 1 lakh rupees per month and I am contributing 10,000 rupees every month in the national pension scheme, then 10,000 rupees I can reduce from my taxable income, and I can say that I will receive tax benefits. I do not have to pay tax on those contributions that I have made. Apart from that, the pension amount that I will get after my retirement, 40% of which is taxable at the retirement, 60% is not taxable. Anarcho-capitalism is basically a extreme form of capitalism, where it is believed that all the activities, not just including of the market but also of governance, for example law and order and everything, should be handled by the private enterprises and not by the government. So it talks about abolition of state. Next is India's ranking, and India's rank in production, exports, and imports. So UPSC has asked a question upon such questions. For example, in prelims 2020, they gave a statement that India is the largest exporter of rice. At that time, we did not know that India is the largest exporter of rice, but India is the largest exporter of rice. When we I have created this particular chart where we will talk about all the important products, that is commodities, and what is the ranking of India in export, import, and production. So first, fish के अंदर the largest producer is China. India is the second largest producer, whereas fish is India's largest agriculture export. Of all the agriculture exports that India makes, including food processing industry and everything, fish is the largest product that is export. In milk, India is the largest producer. In milk, India is the largest producer and also the largest consumer in the world. In rice, India is not the largest producer. China is the largest producer, but India is the largest exporter. In the rice, that as I am saying this, you might find it this data is very heavy. It is very difficult to consume it in short term. So you have to look at this chart again and again. You download this PDF from our Telegram channel, and you have to look at this chart at least 5-7 times. Then you will be able to solve questions if there is any question based upon this chart in the UPSC Prelims. So after making this chart, I have not made mistake in UPSC Prelims. Whenever there was a question upon the trade of India with any other country, I have been able to solve this question very easily. So look at this chart at least 5 to 7 times. This will be very helpful. So in rice, China is the largest producer, but India is the largest exporter. UPSC has already asked a question upon this particular data. So you should know 45% of the world's exports are made by India, and of the exports that India is making, non-basmati is more than basmati. India has around 80% share in aromatic rice. Aromatic rice is basically basmati. Sugar and sugarcane. Sugarcane, sugar is made from sugarcane. Sugarcane, the production is higher in Brazil. The largest producer of sugarcane is Brazil, whereas the largest producer of sugar is India. Why so? Because the sugarcane that is produced in Brazil is not used exclusively for sugar. The sugarcane that is produced in Brazil is also used for developing biodiesel and molasses, all these kind of biofuels. Whereas in India, the biofuel is not used as much. Sugarcane is not used as much for producing biofuel. As a result, India is the largest producer of sugar. So you should know, sugarcane, Brazil is the largest producer, but sugar, India is the largest producer. Exports, Brazil is largest exporter of sugar. Spices is a special category where India is the largest producer, largest exporter, as well as largest consumer. So this data is about production. This is export, this is import, this is consumer. So India is the largest producer, consumer, as well as exporter of spices. Tea mein India is the second largest producer. Wheat mein India is the second largest producer. Oil seeds mein India is the largest producer. In oil seeds, India is the largest producer as well as largest importer of edible oil. In this import, 60% is palm oil only, and if in our production, palm oil is not produced, the largest producing oil seeds in India is soybean oil. Palm oil, India is nowhere close in the palm oil production, but India is the largest importer in the world. Palm oil ka India is the largest importer. Any other oil also, India is the largest importer. Oil seeds, India is the largest producer. So in pulses, India is the largest producer, largest importer, as well as largest consumer. India is the largest producer, consumer, as well as importer of pulses. India वर्ल्ड में सबसे ज्यादा पल्सेस प्रोड्यूस करता है. दाल जितनी भी है सबसे ज्यादा इंडिया वर्ल्ड में प्रोड्यूस करता है, बट इसका कंजम्पशन इतना ज्यादा है कि सबसे बड़ा इंपोर्टर भी इंडिया ही है. तो इंडिया इज द लार्जेस्ट प्रोड्यूसर, इंपोर्टर, एज वेल एज कंज्यूमर ऑफ पल्सेस इन द वर्ल्ड. तो again I have given the list from the above chart only that India is the largest producer in sugar. Sugar में India largest producer है, sugar cane में Brazil. Cotton, India is the largest producer. Milk, pulses, oil seeds, millet, spices, jute, mango, banana, papaya, okra, lemon, fruits. Now you have to look at this list multiple times. Second largest producer in all these things. In mineral production, India is the largest producer of mica. Exporter, now exporter you should know. India is the largest exporter in rice. India is the largest exporter of spices. And India is the largest exporter of gems and jewelries. There are not many goods where India exports much. So if India is the largest exporter of any particular commodity, you should know about it. In agriculture, area wise, when we look at which crop is grown in how much area total, cultivated area, we see that rice has the highest cultivated area in our country, followed by pulses and wheat. Earlier, wheat was more than pulses, but recently pulses have overtaken wheat. So you should know rice, pulses, and then wheat. Production wise, sugarcane has the highest production because the yield of sugarcane is much higher than all the other crops combined. Recently, National Turmeric Board was formed. So National Turmeric Board, Government of India has established a National Turmeric Board in the state of Telangana under the Ministry of Commerce and Industry. There are 13 members, and about the production and consumption of turmeric, India is the largest producer, consumer as well as exporter of turmeric in the world. State-wise, Telangana has the highest production of turmeric, and that is why the National Turmeric Board is established in Telangana. Now, we are just going to look at this particular chart. You have to read it and memorize it multiple times. What you have to know here is which board is under which ministry. So you first memorize Ministry of Commerce and Industry. What are the boards which are there in the Ministry of Commerce and Industry? Then you see Ministry of Agriculture and Farmers Welfare. What are the boards which are there in the Ministry of Agriculture and Farmers Welfare? Then Ministry of Fisheries and Dairying. There is Fishery Board and National Dairy Development Board. These two are part of Ministry of Fisheries and Dairying. And then Ministry of Textile, there is Silk and Jute. Silk and Jute both are part of Ministry of Textile. Whereas coffee, rubber, tea, tobacco, spices and turmeric all are part of Ministry of Commerce and Industry. Except turmeric, all the boards under the Ministry of Commerce and Industry are of statutory nature, whereas recently the turmeric board is executive board. You also have to look at the cities. Most of the time, cities are the one which are in the region of highest producing areas. For example, when you look at the coffee production happens in Karnataka, so the board is in Bengaluru. For if you look at tea production happens in Calcutta and Assam, so the board is in Kolkata. So similarly, the cities are also logically arranged. You have to look at which one of them are executive. So turmeric board, bee board, horticulture board and fisheries. Turmeric, bee, horticulture and fisheries. These four are executive, rest all are statutory. Nobel Prize in Economy was provided to Claudia Goldin. It was provided for her study in the female labor force participation rate, and she talked about U hypothesis. U hypothesis was also talked about in the economic survey 2019. So you should know what is U hypothesis. U hypothesis is basically reduction in female labor force participation rate as the GDP of a country increases, and after a point of time, the female labor force participation again starts to increase. So when the economy changes from agriculture to industry sector, the participation of women will reduce, because in industrial sector women is not a big source of employment. So when the economy changes from agriculture to industry, the participation of women will reduce, and again when it changes from industry to service economy, the participation of women will increase. Asian premium was also in news. What is Asian premium? Asian premium is basically OPEC countries, oil producing and exporting countries. So OPEC countries charge a premium to Asian countries. For example, the OPEC countries are selling the oil $80 per barrel to America, but to India they will charge $90 per barrel. So there was a $10 of premium which was charged by the OPEC countries, which is still charged by the OPEC countries on the Asian countries. But recently Saudi Arabia has reduced this premium from $10 to 3.5 per barrel. Why does this happen? Because India started diversifying its procurement, and India started purchasing the oil from Russia at a deep discount. As a result, procurement from Saudi Arabia reduced, and Saudi Arabia had to adjust to the market prices. Now these are important reports. We do not have to do these reports because there is a separate class we are going to conduct either day after tomorrow or on 26th, where you will be notified in advance. So we are going to do the reports then. Now for GDP estimation, there are three approaches used. For GDP estimation, there are three approaches used. One is production approach, other is expenditure approach, next is income approach. In income approach, there are four factors of production basically in any economy. One is land, then there is capital, then there is labor, and then there is enterprise. So on land you get rent. On labor you get wages. On capital you get interest. On enterprise you get profit. So in income approach, there are four factors of production, and the four sources of income are calculated and combined to calculate the GDP of that particular nation. In expenditure approach, there are three things: consumption, investment, government expenditure, and net exports. CIGNX: consumption, investment, government expenditure, or net exports. In government documents, the terminology used is private final consumption expenditure, that is C; gross fixed capital formation, that is investment; government final consumption expenditure, that is government expenditure; and net exports, that is NX, net exports. In production approach, value addition in primary, secondary, and tertiary sector and consumption of fixed capital is added. There is real GDP and nominal GDP. Real GDP is basically nominal GDP minus inflation. Now these terms were given in the 2011 question on inflation. Question on inflation is highly likely this year. So if there is any question or any data or any information that you read about inflation, please note it down. There can be a question on inflation this year. So in 2011, the question was: economic growth is usually coupled with deflation, inflation, stagflation, and hyperinflation. Answer to this question was inflation. But we should also know what is deflation, what is stagflation, and what is hyperinflation. There are two terms that you should be aware about. First is deflation and next is disinflation. Deflation is reduction in prices. Inflation is basically increase in prices. If the this pen today cost 90 rupees and tomorrow if it cost 100 rupees, then we will say there is an inflation of 10 rupees. Whereas deflation, when there is reduction of prices from 90 to the price of this pen reduces to 80 rupees, then we will say the prices have reduced and there is deflation in the economy. Disinflation is reduction in rate of inflation. For example, earlier the inflation was every year the prices were increasing by 10%, but now the prices are increasing by only 5%. So we say there is disinflation because the rate of inflation, prices are still increasing, but the rate of increase has reduced. So there is disinflation. Then we have stagflation. Stagflation is stagnation plus inflation. When the economy is facing stagnation and there is inflation in the economy. Reflation is return of inflation after a period of deflation. Once the prices have reduced, again if the prices started increasing, then we call it deflation. Suppressed inflation because of fiscal and monetary policy. The prices of goods and services in the market do not reflect the actual situation. For example, during the COVID-19, if the prices of rice were increasing, the government provided subsidized rice to the poor people. So the price of rice was suppressed by the government activities. So that is suppressed inflation. Hyperinflation is basically uncontrolled rise in prices. Now in measures of inflation, we will see consumer price index. Consumer price index, there are 2-3 things that you have to know. These are the prices that are paid by the consumer at retail level. The base year is 2011 and 12. The base year is same for consumer price index as well as wholesale price index WPI 2011-12. The consumer price index is measured by National Statistics Office of the Ministry of Statistics and Program Implementation, NSO of MOSPI, whereas wholesale price index is published by Economic Advisor of Department of Industry and Internal Trade of Ministry of Commerce and Industry. This is Ministry of Statistics and Program Implementation. This is Ministry of Commerce and Industry. Base year is same in both of them. The food and beverages have a weightage of 45% in CPI, whereas in WPI the weightage is 24%. Now RBI is given a target of 4% plus minus 2%, that is 2% to 6% for the consumer price index, and if the target is breached, for example inflation is more than 6% for 3 consecutive quarters, then the Reserve Bank of India has to submit a report to the Government of India explaining why it has happened and what are the steps that the RBI is going to take to reduce inflation and control inflation. Now recently RBI submitted the report and people asked what was there in the report. So Government of India said that RBI needs to submit the report but there is no requirement to make it public. So no need to disclose it to the public. This is an important news that you should know. About the wholesale price index, the manufacturer price is basically ex-factory level, and the food price is mandi level. It does not include indirect taxes. Indirect taxes is not including while calculating wholesale price index, and it is used as a GDP deflator. Why WPI and CPI show different figures? Because weightage of different articles is different. For example, food has 45% weightage in CPI, whereas 24% in WPI. Service sector is absent in WPI. In CPI, it is available. For example, banking, health, education, transport, telecom, all these are not part of WPI. WPI is different areas. WPI is similar in different areas, despite differences in retail prices due to taxes and transportation cost. Now, the actual cost of this pen might vary in different states because of transportation. It is manufactured in Gujarat and transported all over India. In Gujarat, it will be cheaper. In West Bengal, it will be expensive. But wholesale price index does not include the transportation cost. As a result, the prices of this pen will reflect similarly in the WPI of Gujarat and West Bengal. What are the measures to control inflation? Monetary measures are basically steps taken by Reserve Bank of India. It will increase CRR, SLR, repo rate. So basically, whenever the RBI wants to control inflation, it will reduce the money supply. How will it reduce the money supply? It will increase CRR, SLR, repo rate, or it will, in open market operation, it will sell securities, and it will, sell securities and bring money to its accounts. Moral suasion, exchange rate management. Fiscal measures are also taken. For example, by Ministry of Finance, they will reduce import tax or increase export tax. They will also provide subsidy to suppress the inflation in the on the pockets of the poor people. They might reduce indirect taxes also. GST tax might also be reduced to reduce the prices of goods and services. Administrative measures can also be taken to control inflation. For example, export ban in 2020. The non-basmati white rice and broken rice was banned from exporting, and this as a result reduced the price of rice in our country. De-hoarding essential commodities acts, free trade agreement also reduced the cost of inflation. Now, fiscal and monetary policy. When you talk about remittances, as per the World Bank, India remains the largest recipient of remittances in the world, $125 billion. After India, there is Mexico and China. And the largest source for India is USA, United States of America, followed by UAE, UK, and Singapore. IMF was also in news because it classified India's exchange rate, from floating to stabilized arrangement. What is stabilized arrangement? Stabilized arrangement is basically when the currency price do not change more than 2% in the past 6 months. Now, there are different exchange rate arrangements provided by IMF. First is independently floating. Independently floating is basically market determined exchange rate, where the monetary policy will intervene only in the rare circumstances to prevent any undue fluctuation or influence on the the currency prices. Managed floating, where the monetary policy regularly influences the prices of exchange rate. Fixed peg is when the price of particular currency is pegged to other currency. For example, Indian rupees will be pegged to US dollar, 80 rupees per dollar, and whenever the price tries to move either way, the RBI will intervene and will try to maintain the price. So that is fixed peg. Crawling peg, it says that the rate will crawl at a particular fixed rate. For example, today the dollar's rate might be 80 rupees, and RBI will say that we want that after 1 year the dollar should cost 90 rupees, and they will take steps to ensure that after 1 year the price of US dollar in India increases to 90 rupees. Exchange rate with no separate legal tender. Example, Eurozone, where the countries do not have separate legal tender, they all use euro. GST Appellate Tribunal, it is an appellate tribunal. The central government established 31 GST Appellate Tribunal across India, and Central GST Act was amended to change the qualification and eligibility of the members. So its constitution is there is 1 president, 2 technical members, and 1 judicial member. So there are 4 members in GST Appellate Tribunal, 1 president, 2 technical, and 1 judicial members. In the judicial member, earlier only judge of a high court or district or additional district judge of 10 years of experience was included, but now one more qualification has been added, that is advocate with 10 years of experience. Early only district judge of 10 years of experience was could have become member, judicial member of GST Appellate Tribunal. Now advocate with 10 years of experience can also become the GST Appellate Tribunal judicial member. The age has been increased. So currently, if anyone wants to become a member of GST Appellate Tribunal, the member has to have an age between 50 to 67, and the president has to have an age between 50 to 70. GST Council is framed under Article 279A of the Constitution of India. Now in taxes, GST tax base was increased recently by including new transactions. For example, 28% GST was applied on online gaming, horse racing and casinos. Now this amount is only on the initial amount paid while entering and not on the amount that is won by it. So 28% GST is charged. It covers both games of skills and chance, not just games of chance. It also includes also games of skills, and TDS will be deducted from the winning in both types at the rate of 30%. Credit information companies, RBI has directed credit information companies. Now RBI is the regulator of credit information companies to create a compensation framework. So if complaint is not resolved within 30 days, CICs need to compensate. So that if anyone complains regarding any credit information to the credit information companies, that has to be resolved within 30 days. If it is not resolved within 30 days, then the CIC has to provide compensation to the complainer. Prompt corrective action framework, RBI extended PCA framework to the government NBFCs. So PCA framework is basically, it was introduced in 2002, and it is a measure where banks with weak financial matrices will fall under PCA framework, and the RBI will try to revive that particular bank. So what are the triggers for any banks to fall into the PCA framework? There are three triggers: capital to risk weighted asset ratio, non-performing asset ratio, and return on assets. If NPAs increase more than 10%, non-performing assets increase more than 10%, then that bank will fall under PCA framework. If capital to risk weighted asset ratio reduce below 9%, then that bank will fall under PCA framework. Or if return on assets reduce below 0.2%. What are the actions that the RBI can take? RBI can take any action. For example, restrict expansion, skip dividend payments, recapitalization on the change ownership. In fact, RBI can take any action. RBI can ask the bank to close its branches. RBI can ask bank to lay off people. RBI can ask bank to stop paying dividend to the shareholders. Anything. RBI can ask bank to do almost anything. RBI direction on willful defaulters. What you should know: what is willful defaulter and what is large defaulter. Willful defaulter is basically borrowers or guarantor who have defaulted without being constrained to do so. I have financial capability to pay, but still I am not paying, then I am a willful defaulter. And if the outstanding amount is more than 25 lakh. Now, if I have borrowed only 50,000 rupees and I am not paying willfully, then I will not be categorized by the bank as a willful defaulter. But if I have taken loan more than 25 lakh and I am not paying willfully, then I will be categorized as willful defaulter. If the amount of default is more than 1 crore, then I will be categorized as large defaulters. Now there is review and finalization on willful defaulters. Whenever any asset becomes a non-performing asset, then bank within 6 months of it being classified as an NPA, bank has to analyze whether this person is a willful defaulter or not. Card tokenization was also in news. Card tokenization was in news because RBI expand scope of card on file tokenization to debit card issuing banks. So basically, whenever I go to any supermarket, I pay by debit card. The details of my debit card are exposed to the system of that particular supermarket. Instead, I can convert my debit card into a particular token, and I can use that token to pay. So if that happens, that particular supermarket will not get information whether this token to which card this token belongs. So my account details, my card details will not be exposed to that particular supermarket. One of the terms that you should know is status holder. Status holder is basically Ministry of Commerce and Industry provides automatic status holder certificate to the foreign trade to people who are engaged in international trade. To whom it is provided to people who have a certain amount who have a certain amount of international trade every year. So the government will automatically provide them status holder. The benefit is that they will get priority custom clearance, and they will also increase the credit worthiness of credibility of Indian exporters in the international market. Financial Inclusion Index is released by Reserve Bank of India. It ranges between 0 and 100, and there is no base year for the Financial Inclusion Index. There are three sub-indices: access, usage, and equality. Monetary policy transmission. What do you mean by monetary policy transmission? When the RBI policy action transmit into changes in the interest rate in the actual market. That is monetary policy transmission. So objective is to manage money supply and control inflation. RBI will reduce interest rate. As a result, banks borrow from RBI, and banks will also reduce interest rate. There is also marginal cost of funds based lending rate. This is basically, it is linked to repo rate, and whenever the RBI reduces the repo rate, the banks have to reduce the MCLR, and as a result, all the loans that the bank is providing will also have to reduce the interest rate for them also. But MCLR is set by banks only. So RBI will say that you have to link MCLR to one of the external benchmarks. For example, repo rate is one of the external benchmarks. There are other external benchmarks also, but RBI will not say how much MCLR you should set. So if the repo rate is 4%, SBI will say our MCLR is 8%. ICICI might say our MCLR is 9%. So if the repo rate reduces from 4% to 3%, then 1% will be reduction in the SBI, 1% reduction will be in the ICICI. Basel III Accord, RBI issues a draft rules for minimum capital requirement under the Basel III Accord. So what are the requirements under the Basel III Accord? First is capital to risk weighted asset ratio. 8% is the minimum capital to risk weighted asset ratio. Apart from that, there is a counter cyclical buffer of 2.5%, 0 to 2.5%. So the total is 10.5% as per the Basel. 8% is capital to risk weighted asset ratio, and 2.5% is counter cyclical buffer. But RBI mandates 9% capital to risk weighted asset ratio plus 2.5 equals to 11.5%. 9% is capital to risk weighted asset ratio, and 2.5% is counter cyclical buffer. So RBI has a 1% higher capital to risk weighted asset ratio compared with Basel III norms. Apart from that, liquidity coverage ratio of 100% is also mandated by the MCLR. Now, incremental cash reserve ratio was also in news. What is incremental cash reserve ratio? Basically, it is applied for a fixed period of time. For example, during the time of demonetization, a huge amount of money was submitted by the people into the banks, and banks have to pay interest on that amount. So bank found it very difficult to manage that amount of cash flow. So what the RBI did is RBI increased incremental CRR to 100%. Whatever money you are getting, you deposit all that money into Reserve Bank of India. So that is incremental cash reserve ratio. That is cash reserve ratio over and above the normal cash reserve ratio, and it is provided only for a fixed period of time. For example, in when the 2000 rupees were discontinued, the incremental cash reserve ratio was increased to 10% for 2 months. Goldilocks scenario, economics have claimed that Indian economy is Goldilocks scenario. Goldilocks scenario is mostly used in the science and technology, but here in economy it is also used. It is basically an ideal situation where the economy is growing at a constant rate of growth, and at the same time inflation is under control and unemployment is also under control. So moderate inflation, steady rate of GDP growth, and low unemployment rate are the features of Goldilocks scenario. Jan Vishwas Act, it basically decriminalizes around 180 offenses. Global minimum tax, 15% of global minimum tax will be applied by the Indian government also. So the equalization levy, which was initiated in 2016, has been removed after the financial year 2026. Inflation and money supply. RBI's contractionary monetary policy in past 2 years is an effort to reduce inflation by reducing money supply in the economy. So whenever there is high money supply in the economy, inflation will increase, and if the inflation is high, the RBI will try to reduce money supply. How will RBI reduce money supply? By increasing CRR, by increasing SLR. So this is ways to increase money supply. How to increase money supply? You reduce CRR, you reduce SLR. So inflation and money supply have a direct correlation. Whenever there is high money supply, the inflation will also increase. Recently, the Sensex fell about 2.1% in just one day, and in January 2024. So what was the reason? Reason was US federal rate cuts, US uncertainty over US federal rate cuts. As a result, you can say if USA increases its interest rate, then there will be outflow from India. Net interest margin, we have already seen what is net interest margin, and rising US bond yield. So what is bond yield? We have to see what is bond yield. Bond yield will be covered in the next section. In the banking financial, we will cover in detail what is bond yield. SSG bank linkage was in news recently. It was started by NABARD, and NABARD was established in 1982 as per the NABARD Act 1981. The function of NABARD is to lend to the financial institution and supervise regional rural banks and state cooperative banks. RBI has made certain policy changes in UPI as well as WALP, WELP, regulatory framework for WELP. In UPI, they have increased the transaction limit. For example, for hospitals and educational institution, the transaction limit has been increased from 1 lakh to 5 lakh rupees. So now, if you want to pay from UPI for educational purposes or for in hospital, you can pay up to 5 lakh rupees. For capital markets, insurance, etc., you can pay up to 2 lakh rupees. And for all other transaction, for example, मैं सब्जी लेने जा रहा हूँ या कुछ कपड़े शॉपिंग करने जा रहा हूँ, तो 1 लाख से ऊपर का मैं पेमेंट UPI से नहीं कर सकता. UPI has been developed by NPCI. There is 2-factor authentication in UPI, and 40% of India's digital transactions are done by UPI. Regulatory framework for WELP, web aggregator. WELP की full form है web aggregation of loan products. What is web aggregation of loan products? Basically, all the loan products will be aggregated on one platform, and you can easily compare the loans. For example, आज मेरे को कोई लोन चाहिए, कार लोन चाहिए, तो मैं अलग अलग बैंक में जाके वहां जाके बात करके आऊंगा और फिर घर पे लाके उनको कंपेयर करूंगा. Whereas WLP के अंदर मुझे वो सारे लोन एक पेज पे मिल जाएंगे, तो मैं इजीली उनको कंपेयर कर सकता हूं. Insolvency and bankruptcy code, you should know the difference between the terminology. Insolvency, what is insolvency? Insolvency is basically inability of a company or individual to repay their debt. If I owe debt to someone and I cannot repay it, then I will say that I have become insolvent. But what is bankruptcy? Bankruptcy is legal proceedings. If I declare myself, I take a legal proceedings, I declare myself, legally that I am unable to repay any of your money, then I will say I have declared myself bankrupt. So this is a legal proceedings when individual declare their inability to repay the debt. Haircut is forego a part of debt by the lender. For example, I owe 100 rupees to someone, and if I am given haircut, then I will reduce the amount that I owe from 100 to say 80 rupees, 60 rupees, 50 rupees. That will depend upon the amount of haircut. Write-off is basically debt written off from the books of accounts of the lender whenever the banks write off certain amount of money. For example, it was said that Nirav Modi's loan have been written off by the SBI or Punjab National Bank. So that does not mean that the amount is not anymore due by the Nirav Modi to the Punjab National Bank. The amount is still due. That has just been written off from the books of accounts of the Punjab National Bank. That has been recognized as a loss. It has been recognized as a loss by the Punjab National Bank, and now the debt will still, the bank will also still try to recover that loan, but that will not reflect in the books of accounts of the bank. Adjudicating authority, there are two adjudicating authority in the IBC. One is NCLT, another is DRT, National Company Law Tribunal, and DRT. NCLT deals with corporates and limited liability partnership. DRT deals with individuals and partnership firms. Companies Amendment Act 2000, it was notified by Ministry of Corporate Affairs in 2023. तो 2020 में अमेंडमेंट हुआ था, नोटिफाई हुआ 2023 के अंदर. इट बेसिकली अलाउज डायरेक्ट लिस्टिंग ऑफ सिक्योरिटीज इन फॉरेन स्टॉक एक्सचेंज बाय द इंडियन कंपनीज. अर्लियर you could Indian companies could borrow money or take money from the outside either in the form of debt or depository receipts. Depository receipts were basically negotiable certificate issued by bank representing foreign company. For example, अमेरिकन कोई बैंक है, वो रिलायंस के शेयर इशू कर रहा है अमेरिका के अंदर और कह रहा है कि ये डिपॉजिटरी रिसीट्स है उन्होंने इशू किए हैं, and that money will be given to Reliance Industries. So the amount of money that the Reliance was borrowing or raising from the US stock market, was very indirect in nature, was through depository receipts. So depository receipts issued in America were called American depository receipts. In any other part of the country, in any other part of the world, for example in France, they were called global depository receipts. UNCITRAL, you should know, United Nations Commission on International Trade and Law. India is member of United Nations Commission of International Trade and Law, and it gives an award of $111 million to the Davis Multimedia by the Indian government. So Indian government has to pay $111 million to the Davis Multimedia. It was established in 1966 by United Nations General Assembly. It is a core legal body of United Nations and in the field of international trade law. It is a 70-member body elected by UNGA for 6 years, and India is member of UNCITRAL since 1968. There are 8 countries which are members of UNCITRAL since 1968. So India is one of those 8 countries. Since the inception of UNCITRAL, India has been elected the members of the UNCITRAL. So this award made by UNCITRAL is binding in nature. IMF quota, IMF executive board has increased the quota. Now it will go to the governor, board of governors, and it will be voted by the board of governors. The quota has been increased by 50%. And the quota is denominated in SDR. SDR are special drawing rights. So special drawing rights is a unit used by IMF. It is not a currency. So it is given categorically in the IMF website also. It is not a currency. It is just a unit of account of the IMF, and the value of SDR depends upon 5 currencies, that is USD, Euro, Renminbi, Yen and Pound. That is America, Europe, China, Japan and UK. इन सब की करेंसी जो है वो इंक्लूड करके इन सब का एक वेटेड एवरेज निकाला जाता है, उसी के बेसिस पे SDR की वैल्यू निकाली जाती है. Insurance surety bond. NHI accepted the first insurance surety bond. Insurance surety bond is basically a 3-party contract where if the government has given me a contract ki yaar you have to make this road, so insurer will become my guarantor. Insurer will say this person will finish this road in particular period of time, and this is a 3-party contract between me, the government of India and the insurer, which is called insurance surety bond. Cryptocurrency. India introduced 30% tax on the gains in cryptocurrency, and apart from 30% income tax, there is also 1% TDS. Liquidity adjustment facility, basically RBI tool to manage liquidity. For example, repo rate, reverse repo rate, bank rate, all these are part of marginal standing facility, marginal deposit facility. ये सब जो है, ये सब liquidity adjustment facility का part है. There was a liquidity deficit in the banking. What is liquidity deficit? Liquidity deficit is basically lack of banks liquid asset compared to short term funds demands in the economy. Short term fund demands क्या होती है हमारे I'm sorry, short term fund demands क्या होती है कि हमारे रोजमर्रा एक्सपेंसेस के लिए जो हमें फंड्स की जरूरत होती है 1 महीना 3 महीने के लिए फंड्स की, तो आर द बैंक्स एबल टू प्रोवाइड दैट मनी टू द पीपल. हम एटीएम पे जाते तो क्या वहां पे पैसे मिल रहे हैं नहीं मिल रहे हैं. सो लिक्विडिटी डेफिसिट मीन लैक ऑफ बैंक्स लिक्विड एसेट कंपेयर टू द शॉर्ट टर्म फंड डिमांड्स इन द economy. Overnight index swap. Overnight index swap was also in news. So it is basically an interest rate derivative where parties exchange fixed and floating interest rate derivatives. कि मैंने कोई लोन ले रखा है fixed interest rate पे and you have taken a loan on flexible interest rate and मुझे ऐसा लग रहा है कि you have better terms and you think that I have better terms, तो हम उस लोन के इंटरेस्ट को एक्सचेंज कर लेंगे. हम उस लोन के सिर्फ इंटरेस्ट को एक्सचेंज कर लेंगे. So parties exchange floating and fixed interest rate securities, that is overnight index swap. So after the amendment of the Companies Act, the Ministry of Finance has notified that public Indian companies which are public limited can list directly in certain international exchanges in GIFT City. So अब हमें पता होना चाहिए GIFT City क्या है. GIFT City is गुजरात इंटरनेशनल फाइनेंस टैक्स सिटी. ये गांधीनगर के अंदर एक सिटी है, स्पेशल इकोनॉमिक जोन है. इट इज क्रिएटेड फॉर द पर्पस ऑफ प्रमोटिंग इंटरनेशनल ट्रेड इन इन्वेस्टमेंट एंड आल्सो इन टेक्नोलॉजी. सो प्रोवाइड वर्ल्ड क्लास फाइनेंस एंड IT जोन फॉर इंडिया एंड द वर्ल्ड, एंड इट कंसिस्ट ऑफ अ मल्टीपल SEG, मल्टी सर्विस SEG, which houses India's first international financial services center. अभी इंटरनेशनल फाइनेंशियल सर्विसेज सेंटर क्या होता है? International Financial Service Center, basically it will provide a platform. जैसे स्टॉक एक्सचेंज होता है वैसे ही इंटरनेशनल फाइनेंशियल सर्विसेज सेंटर होता है। वो इंटरनेशनल फाइनेंस और फाइनेंस के प्रोडक्ट्स होते हैं। फॉर एग्जांपल म्यूचुअल फंड है जो बाहर के हैं, या फिर फॉर एग्जांपल डेट, इंडियन कंपनी को कहीं डेट्स इशू करनी है यूएसए के अंदर, या यूएस की कंपनी को इंडिया के अंदर डेट इशू करनी है। तो ये सब कैसे होगा, इन सबको मैनेज कौन करेगा और ये कहाँ पे इशू करेंगे? तो पहले अगर रिलायंस को यूएस से पैसा उठाना है तो रिलायंस को यूएस जाना पड़ता था। नाउ दे कैन गो टू द इंटरनेशनल फाइनेंशियल सर्विसेज सेंटर वेयर दे विल इशू द सिक्योरिटीज, और यूएस के इन्वेस्टर डायरेक्टली वहां से रिलायंस के शेयर्स खरीद सकते हैं। तो दैट इज इंटरनेशनल फाइनेंशियल सर्विसेज सेंटर। और इंटरनेशनल फाइनेंशियल सर्विसेज सेंटर को रेगुलेट करने के लिए इंडिया का फर्स्ट आईएफएससी एस्टैब्लिश्ड इन गिफ्ट सिटी। गिफ्ट इज अ सिटी, आईएफएससी इज अ सेंटर, और उसको रेगुलेट करने के लिए आईएफएससी है सेंटर अथॉरिटी, आईएफएससी अथॉरिटी एस्टैब्लिश्ड टू रेगुलेट ऑल द आईएफएससीज इन अ कंट्री। फर्स्ट गिफ्ट सिटी में आया, बट आईएफएससी तो कहीं भी खुल सकता है, जयपुर में, लखनऊ में, कानपुर में, कहीं भी खुल सकता है। तो उन सब आईएफएससीज को रेगुलेट करने के लिए आईएफएससी एस्टैब्लिश किया गया है बाय आईएफएससी एक्ट 2019। नाउ वी टॉक्ड अबाउट बॉन्ड यील्ड्स। व्हाट इज बॉन्ड यील्ड? बॉन्ड यील्ड इज बेसिकली कि बॉन्ड यील्ड इज इक्वल टू मैच्योरिटी प्राइस माइनस बॉन्ड प्राइस। बॉन्ड की मैच्योरिटी प्राइस फिक्स होती है। फॉर एग्जांपल, आज मैं बॉन्ड देता हूं, उसकी मैच्योरिटी 100 रुपए है, तो मैं बॉन्ड वो कितने में लूंगा? मैंने 90 रुपए में वो बॉन्ड लिया, तो आई विल बी इश्यूड दैट बॉन्ड एट ₹90 एंड द बॉन्ड मैच्योरिटी वैल्यू इज 100 रुपीज। व्हाट इज बॉन्ड यील्ड? 10 रुपीज। कि आज मैंने जितने में खरीदा और मुझे वापस मिलेगा, दैट इज यील्ड, दैट इज रिटर्न। तो बॉन्ड यील्ड इज मैच्योरिटी वैल्यू माइनस बॉन्ड प्राइस। नेक्स्ट इज एक्सचेंज रेट। देयर आर टू टाइप्स ऑफ एक्सचेंज रेट, नॉमिनल इफेक्टिव एक्सचेंज रेट एंड रियल इफेक्टिव एक्सचेंज रेट। इसके ऊपर यूपीएससी ने क्वेश्चन पूछ रखा है। दिस इज डिनोमिनेटेड इन डॉलर्स, दिस इज डिनोमिनेटेड इन डॉलर्स। जनरली एक्सचेंज रेट रुपीज में डिनोमिनेटेड होती है। फॉर एग्जांपल, हम सुनते हैं कि 80 रुपए का डॉलर हो गया, 85 रुपीज का डॉलर हो गया, 90 रुपीज का डॉलर हो गया। सो दैट इज डिनोमिनेटेड इन रुपीज, बट दिस वन इज डिनोमिनेटेड इन डॉलर्स। सो नॉमिनल इफेक्टिव एक्सचेंज रेट इज बेसिकली 1 रुपए में कितने डॉलर आ जाएंगे। सो करंटली द नॉमिनल इफेक्टिव एक्सचेंज रेट इज इन 1 रुपीज वी गेट 0.012 डॉलर्स। रियल इफेक्टिव एक्सचेंज रेट इज इन्फ्लेशन एडजस्टेड करेंसी। 1 रुपए में मैं कितना सामान यहां खरीद सकता हूं। फॉर एग्जाम्पल, इफ इन इंडिया आई कैन बाई दिस पेन इन 1 रुपीज, हाउ मच डॉलर वुड आई रिक्वायर टू बाई दिस पेन इन यूएसए? इफ इन यूएसए I require $0.5, then we will say the real effective exchange rate is $0.5 to 1 rupees. अगर इस पेन को खरीदने में वहां पे मुझे $0.25 लगेंगे, then we will say the real effective exchange rate is $0.25 to 1 rupees. So this is not very important. You just have to know two things: processing area and non-processing area. In the SEG, processing area is basically where manufacturing of goods and rendering of services happens, for the purpose of exports. So that is processing area, and all the other industries which provide support to those manufacturing and service industry are part of non-processing area. For example, IT and IT enabled services. If you are manufacturing in a particular SEG, for example, if in Delhi, in Noida, there is a special economic zone, and I'm manufacturing there. To manufacture there, I would need certain services, certain IT services, and those IT services are also available in the SEG. But those IT services are not exporting directly; they are providing services to me. So they are part of non-manufacturing services and non-processing area, and I am part of processing area. In any SEG, the processing area cannot be less than 50%. So you should know Leads Index. Leads Index is released by Ministry of Commerce and Industry, and Pradhan Mantri Awas Yojana Urban is established by Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs. The beneficiaries are of 3 types: economically weaker section having income less than 3 lakh per annum, low income group having income less than 6 lakh per annum, and middle income group having income less than 18 lakh per annum. Recently, India has overtaken China to become the largest contributor of inland capture water fisheries. Inland capture water fisheries. Today also, fish के production में China still has 70% share in the world. World में जितनी भी fish produce होती है या fish जो capture की जाती है, उसके अंदर 70% share China का ही है. It includes inland as well as marine fisheries. But inland के अंदर जो capture fisheries है, उसमें India has overtaken China. Inland का तो मतलब हम समझते ही हैं, which is not part of the seas. For example, lakes and rivers. उसके अंदर भी दो तरीके होते हैं. There is capture fisheries and there is culture fisheries. Capture fisheries, fish obtained directly from the lakes, rivers and ponds. भाई नेचुरली वहां जितनी फिशेस हो रही है हमने उसमें से कैप्चर कर लिया. कल्चर फिशरीज आर रेजिंग एंड हार्वेस्टिंग इन अ कंट्रोल्ड एनवायरनमेंट कि भाई ये एरिया हमने डेवलप किया है, इसके अंदर हम फिश के बीज भी डाल रहे हैं, मतलब फिश के स्पॉन्स भी डाल रहे हैं, उसके अंदर खाद भी डाल रहे हैं, सारा काम कर रहे हैं, एंड वी आर कल्चरिंग दोस फिशरीज, दैट इज culture fishery. So India has become the largest producer in inland capture fisheries, not culture fisheries. Amplify 2.0 assessment and monitoring platform for livable, inclusive and future ready urban India. It is launched by Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs. First RRTS was launched in India. The train name was Namo Bharat Rapidex train. It was started from Sahitabad to Duhai Depot, that is in NCR region. What you have to know is who is implementing agency. Implementing agency is NCR Transport Corporation, National Capital Region Transport Corporation. It is under the administrative control of Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs, not under Ministry of Railways. It is under Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs, and it is a joint venture of Government of India, Government of Delhi, Haryana, Rajasthan and UP. So there are 4 state governments, Delhi, Haryana, Rajasthan and UP. Apart from that, the 5th is Government of India. इन पांचों ने joint venture बनाया है NCRTC. It is under the administrative control of Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs of the central government. The chairman is Secretary of Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs. International Competition Network. Competition Commission of India, CCI, became the member of steering group of ICN. This is the first time that CCI has become a member of a steering group, and it will remain the member for next 2 years. MS Swaminathan was also in news. He was, awarded Bharat Ratna posthumously. So there are certain facts that you should know about MS Swaminathan. He received the highest civilian award, Bharat Ratna, of course, and he was the father of Green Revolution that we all know. But he was also the recipient of first World Food Prize in 1987. 1987 में World Food Prize start किया गया था, and MS Swaminathan was the first person to receive that award. The new HYV seeds, rice varieties, for example, Pusa Basmati, ADT 27 Rasi, ये सब rice की varieties है. Then wheat varieties, Sonalika, Kalyan Sona, basically inspired by the Mexican wheat dwarf. National Commission on Farmers, formed under the chairmanship of Swaminathan, and MS Swaminathan Research Foundation was also formed in Chennai. So this is it from my side today. Thank you very much. We will meet in the next class, that is on indexes and reports. Thank you.